Standing in my apartment at 12:30 in the morning, wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a confused expression, I never imagined that answering my ringing phone would expose the most devastating betrayal of my life. My sister Sarah's voice cracked through the speaker as thunder crashed outside my window, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush that made my stomach drop. Marcus had just threatened to leave her forever unless she could prove she wasn't completely dependent on family for everything, and she needed me to babysit her 3 kids immediately to show him she could handle things independently. This was the 4th emergency babysitting request this month, but as I grabbed my keys and rushed into the storm, I had absolutely no idea I was about to discover a manipulation so cruel it would change our family forever. The drive to Sarah's house through the thunderstorm felt like navigating through a war zone. Lightning illuminated the suburban streets in violent flashes while rain hammered my windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up. When I finally pulled into her driveway, water was already pooling in the gutters, and the whole neighborhood looked like it was drowning under the relentless downpour. Sarah's front door swung open before I could even knock, revealing a scene that immediately set my nerves on edge. 3 exhausted children stood in the hallway like refugees from their own home. 8-year-old Emma clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit against her chest, her brown eyes wide with the kind of worry that no child should carry. 5-year-old Tyler peered out from behind his sister, his dinosaur pajamas wrinkled and his blonde hair sticking up in every direction. Baby Grace, barely 18 months old, sat on the carpet in a diaper that clearly needed changing, surrounded by scattered toys and crackers ground into the hardwood floor. The house itself told a story of chaos that went far beyond a typical evening with young children. Dirty dishes towered in the sink like a ceramic monument to neglect, while the overwhelming smell of spoiled milk and dirty diapers created an atmosphere that made me want to breathe through my mouth. Toys were scattered across every surface as if a hurricane had torn through a daycare center, and somewhere in the distance, a smoke detector chirped its low battery warning in a rhythm that matched my growing headache. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. Dark circles under her green eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights, and her oversized sweatshirt hung on her small frame like she was disappearing inside it. At 25, she looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of single motherhood and whatever drama was unfolding in her relationship with Marcus. "Thank God you're here, Donald," she said, her voice carrying that particular blend of desperation and relief that I'd grown accustomed to over the past few months. "Marcus is being impossible about everything, and I need to prove to him that I can be independent without constantly running to family for help." The irony of that statement hit me immediately, but I was too tired and too concerned about the children to point it out. Instead, I focused on getting Grace cleaned up and fed, while Emma helped Tyler find his favorite stuffed elephant that he couldn't sleep without. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this whole situation felt different, more calculated than the usual chaos that seemed to follow Sarah wherever she went. My first real clue came when I noticed Marcus's belongings scattered throughout the house. His work boots sat by the front door next to a muddy hard hat with Morrison Construction stenciled across the front. His coffee mug occupied the kitchen counter next to a stack of invoices bearing his name, and his aftershave lingered in the bathroom like a ghost of domestic stability. For someone who had supposedly just stormed out in anger, Marcus seemed to have left an awful lot of himself behind. "Where exactly is Marcus right now?" I asked Sarah as I warmed a bottle for Grace, trying to keep my tone casual and non-judgmental. Sarah's answer came too quickly, with the practiced smoothness of someone who had rehearsed it. "He went to stay at his friend Jake's place because he said I rely too much on family and need to learn to handle things on my own. He thinks I call you every time there's a problem instead of figuring things out myself." Emma, who had been quietly helping Tyler brush his teeth, looked up from the bathroom doorway with the kind of innocent honesty that only children possess. But Mommy Marcus has been sleeping at Jake's house for a whole week now, not just tonight. And yesterday you were on the phone with Janet talking about how Uncle Donald always comes when you call him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Sarah's carefully constructed explanation began to crumble around the edges. Her face flushed red as she tried to redirect Emma's attention back to getting Tyler ready for bed. But the damage was already done. The seed of suspicion that had been growing in my mind suddenly sprouted into something much larger and more troubling. As I settled Grace into her crib and tucked Tyler into his race car bed, I found myself paying closer attention to the details that surrounded me. The house was messy. Yes, but it wasn't the kind of organic chaos that comes from children playing and living their lives. Instead, it felt staged, like someone had deliberately scattered toys and left dishes unwashed to create the impression of overwhelming crisis. Walking back toward the living room, I passed Sarah's bedroom and noticed her door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see her sitting on her bed with her laptop open, typing furiously while speaking in hushed tones on her phone. The conversation itself wasn't what caught my attention, though. It was the notebook sitting open beside her, its pages covered with what looked like a detailed schedule or plan. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer to the doorway, straining to hear her words without being obvious about eavesdropping. What I heard made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about these midnight emergency calls. Janet. "The plan is working perfectly," Sarah whispered into her phone, her voice carrying a tone of satisfaction that I'd never heard before. "Marcus thinks I'm becoming too independent, and that's making him nervous, but at the same time, Donald keeps proving that I have all the family support I need. Marcus will come crawling back because he can't stand the thought of another man always being here to help me when he won't." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Standing there in the hallway of my sister's house, listening to rain continue to pound against the windows, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet as the reality of my situation became crystal clear. These weren't emergency calls for help from a struggling single mother. They were carefully orchestrated moves in some twisted relationship game that I didn't even know I was playing. I backed away from her door on unsteady legs, my mind racing to process what I'd just discovered. Every late-night call, every crisis that seemed to happen, right when Marcus and Sarah were having problems, every time I'd rearranged my life to rush over and help. It had all been part of some elaborate manipulation designed to make Marcus jealous while simultaneously proving Sarah's independence. The worst part was how perfectly it had worked. I'd been so eager to help, so determined to be the supportive brother that our parents would have wanted me to be, that I'd never questioned the timing or frequency of these emergencies. I just assumed that single motherhood was incredibly difficult and that Sarah needed extra support during a challenging time in her life. Now standing in her hallway while thunder continued to rumble overhead, I realized that my sister had been using my love for her and her children as a weapon in her relationship battles. She'd taken my grief over our parents' death, my sense of family responsibility, and my genuine care for my nieces and nephew, and turned it all into ammunition for her psychological warfare with Sa. The betrayal cut deeper than any romantic heartbreak I'd ever experienced, because it involved not just my trust, but the children's well-being and the memory of our parents who had raised us to look out for each other. As I stood there trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered, I could hear Grace starting to fuss in her crib, and Tyler calling out for water, completely innocent of the adult games being played around their childhood. The next morning arrived gray and sullen with yesterday's storm, leaving behind puddles that reflected a sky the color of old pewter. I'd barely slept after returning home from Sarah's house, my mind churning through every emergency call, every last-minute crisis, every time I dropped everything to rush to her aid. Now, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I stared out the window, I made a decision that would have terrified me just 24 hours earlier. I was going to investigate exactly how deep this deception ran. My first call went to Tom Wilson, my college roommate who now worked at Patterson's Hardware and had maintained friendships with most of our old crowd. Tom possessed the rare combination of being both completely trustworthy and plugged into the local gossip network that kept small-town America running. If Sarah had been talking about her relationship strategies, Tom would have heard something. "Donald, good to hear from you, man." Tom's voice carried the easy warmth of genuine friendship as he answered on the second ring. "How's the graphic design business treating you?" "Can't complain," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Actually, I was calling about Sarah. I'm getting a little concerned about how often she's been having these relationship problems with Marcus. Thought maybe you'd heard something around town that might give me some insight." The pause on Tom's end stretched just long enough to confirm my worst fears. When he finally spoke, his tone carried the careful weight of someone choosing their words very deliberately. "Donald, I probably shouldn't be the one telling you this, but Sarah's been pretty vocal about her relationship strategy at bowling league. She's been bragging to Janet and some of the other women about having a foolproof system for keeping Marcus interested and proving her independence at the same time." My coffee mug hit the kitchen counter harder than I intended, the ceramic making a sharp crack that echoed through my quiet apartment. "What kind of system?" "Look, I don't want to cause family drama, but she's been talking about how she's got you trained to come running whenever she calls, and how that makes Marcus both jealous and impressed with her family support. She calls it her insurance policy for keeping him committed while maintaining her freedom." The words felt like ice water in my veins. Hearing my suspicions confirmed by someone outside the family made the betrayal real in a way that eavesdropping couldn't. Sarah hadn't just manipulated me in the moment. She'd been openly discussing her manipulation strategy with other people, treating my love and concern like they were tools in her relationship toolkit. After hanging up with Tom, I sat in my kitchen for nearly an hour, staring at the phone and trying to decide whether I really wanted to dig deeper into this rabbit hole. Part of me hoped that maybe Tom had misunderstood something, that there was an innocent explanation for what sounded like calculated manipulation. But the rational part of my mind knew that I'd already heard enough to know the truth. My second call went to Janet Murphy, Sarah's co-worker at Sunshine Dental and her closest friend since high school. Janet was divorced herself, raising 2 teenagers on a receptionist's salary, and it always struck me as someone who'd learned hard lessons about relationships the expensive way. If anyone would know the full extent of Sarah's strategy, it would be her. I caught Janet during her lunch break, and she answered with the harried tone of someone juggling too many responsibilities at once. After exchanging pleasantries about her kids and her job, I steered the conversation toward my real purpose. "Janet, I'm calling because I'm worried about Sarah and Marcus. She's been calling me for emergency babysitting pretty regularly, and I'm starting to wonder if there's something bigger going on that I should know about." What happened next was like watching a dam burst. Janet, apparently assuming that I was already fully informed about Sarah's tactics, launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the strategy she'd helped develop. "Oh, Donald, you've been such a lifesaver for Sarah's plan." Janet gushed, her voice carrying genuine admiration for what she clearly saw as a brilliant relationship strategy. When she told me about Marcus being the jealous type, but also wanting an independent woman, I knew we could work with that. The key was showing him that she had options and support, but also that she could handle things without being clingy. My hand gripped the phone so tightly I was surprised it didn't crack. "What exactly did you help her plan?" "Well, we studied Marcus's patterns for a few weeks. Sarah noticed that he got most attentive right after they had fights about her being too dependent, but he also got jealous when other men were around helping her. So we figured out how to time the emergency calls to you so that Marcus would see you leaving just as he was coming back to apologize." The systematic nature of the manipulation took my breath away. They hadn't just been taking advantage of my willingness to help, they'd been studying Marcus like a laboratory specimen, documenting his emotional patterns and responses to create the most effective manipulation strategy possible. "Janet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Some of those emergencies were pretty serious. Tyler's fever. Grace's crying fits the night Sarah said she couldn't cope. Oh, honey, Sarah is such a good actress. Janet laughed, completely oblivious to the horror I was feeling. She's got this whole system down. She can make Tyler's temperature run a little high with warm washcloths, and Grace responds to being kept awake just long enough to be cranky when you arrive. Sarah studied child development in community college before she had Emma, so she knows exactly which buttons to push. I had to set the phone down and walk to my bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me appeared older than his 28 years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, rushing to help with manufactured crises. My parents had raised us to be there for each other, to prioritize family above personal convenience, and Sarah had weaponized those values against both me and her own children. When I returned to the phone, Janet was still talking, describing in enthusiastic detail how Sarah had documented my response, times my emotional reactions, and even my willingness to cancel personal plans to help with emergencies. She'd been treating me like a research subject in her relationship experiment. The brilliant part, Janet continued, is that Sarah's been teaching this strategy to other single moms in our support group. We've got a whole chat thread where we share tactics for keeping men interested while maintaining independence. Sarah's definitely the star pupil. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Sarah been manipulating me and Marcus, but she'd been spreading these tactics to other women, potentially destroying other families' trust and honest communication. My sister had become the architect of a manipulation network that was designed to turn family love into relationship leverage. After ending the call with Janet, I drove aimlessly around town for 2 hours trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. Every street corner seemed to hold memories of rushing to Sarah's aid, of canceled dates and interrupted sleep and rearranged work schedules, all in service of what I'd believed was genuine family crisis management. I finally parked at Riverside Park, where our parents used to take us for picnics when we were children. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water where Sarah and I had learned to skip stones, I felt the full weight of how thoroughly she'd betrayed not just my trust, but the memory of our parents and the values they'd tried to instill in us. The worst part was realizing that Marcus, who I'd begun to see as another player in this drama, was actually as much a victim as I was. While I'd been unconsciously competing with him for the role of Sarah's primary support system, he'd been trying to navigate a relationship with someone who was deliberately creating chaos to test his commitment and jealousy responses. As the sun began to set over the river, painting the water in shades of orange and gold that reminded me of autumn evenings from my childhood, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just 48 hours earlier. I was going to find out exactly how extensive this manipulation had become, and then I was going to put a stop to it, even if it meant temporarily becoming the villain in Sarah's story. The children deserved better than being used as props in their mother's relationship theater. Marcus deserved honesty from the woman he was considering marrying, and I deserved to reclaim my life from a sister who had turned family love into a strategic weapon. Whatever confrontation lay ahead, it couldn't be worse than continuing to enable a system that was damaging everyone involved, including the children I loved so much. Thursday evening brought with it the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel sharper and more focused. I'd spent 3 days gathering information and steeling myself for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. When Sarah called at 6:15 asking me to babysit again because Marcus was being difficult about commitment issues, I agreed immediately, but this time with a plan of my own. Instead of arriving at my usual time of 8:30, I decided to show up an hour early, hoping to catch Sarah off guard and see what really went on before these supposed emergencies began. What I discovered when I quietly entered through the back door using my spare key was far worse than anything I'd imagined during my darkest moments of suspicion. Sarah stood in the living room like a director staging a play, giving instructions to her 3 children with the kind of detailed precision that spoke of extensive rehearsal. Emma sat on the couch holding a box of tissues, practicing the exact way she should cry when Marcus arrived. Sarah was coaching her on which tears looked most genuine and how to time her sobs for maximum emotional impact. "Remember, sweetie, you need to say that you miss Uncle Donald and ask Marcus why he doesn't help us like Uncle Donald does," Sarah instructed, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone who'd given these directions multiple times before. But don't make it sound mean. Make it sound confused and sad, like you just don't understand why grown-ups can't get along. Tyler sat on the floor surrounded by Grace's toys, which he was deliberately scattering in specific patterns while Sarah supervised. The yellow blocks need to be closer to the couch, so it looks like Uncle Donald bought them for Grace, she told him. And make sure some of the new books are visible but not obvious. Grace herself sat in her high chair, completely unaware that her innocent presence was being used as ammunition in an adult psychological war. Sarah had changed her into a particularly cute outfit, one that Marcus had complimented before, and had strategically messed up her hair to create that adorable wind-swept look that tugged at heartstrings. Standing in the doorway watching my sister orchestrate this performance using her own children as actors, I felt something inside my chest break in a way that I knew would never fully heal. These weren't just manipulation tactics. They were a systematic abuse of childhood innocence in service of adult relationship games. "Sarah," I said quietly, stepping into the room and watching her face go white as she realized she'd been caught red-handed. "Donald, you're early," she stammered, immediately shifting into damage control mode. "The kids were just, playing while we waited for you." Emma looked back and forth between her mother and me, confusion written across her 8-year-old face as she tried to understand why the grown-ups suddenly looked so serious. Tyler stopped arranging toys and climbed onto the couch next to his sister, sensing that something important was happening, even if he couldn't identify exactly what it was. "Emma," I said gently, kneeling down to her eye level, "can you tell me what your mom was just teaching you to say about me and Marcus?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be contained. Sarah tried to intervene, moving toward Emma with the clear intention of redirecting the conversation, but I held up my hand in a gesture that stopped her cold. "It's okay, Emma. You're not in trouble. I just need to understand what's been happening." Emma's brown eyes filled with tears that were completely genuine, unlike the ones she'd been practicing just moments before. "Mommy said I should tell Marcus that I miss you when he's not here, and ask him why he doesn't help us like you do. She said it would make Marcus understand how much we need him." "And how long have you been practicing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Since last weekend," Tyler chimed in with the helpful honesty that 5-year-olds specialize in. "Mommy said we're helping her show Marcus that we love him, but also that Uncle Donald takes good care of us." Sarah's face had progressed from white to red as the full extent of her manipulation was exposed by her own children. "Donald, you don't understand. Marcus needs to see that I have support systems, but also that I'm capable of managing things independently. It's complicated." "No, Sarah, it's not complicated at all," I said, standing up and facing my sister directly. "It's manipulation, and it's using your children as emotional weapons in your relationship battles." Before Sarah could respond, we all heard Marcus's truck pulling into the driveway. The sound of his diesel engine had become as familiar as any family member's voice over the past 6 months, and normally it would have triggered Sarah's emergency preparation routine. This time, however, it served as the opening curtain for a confrontation that was about to expose years of deception. Marcus walked through the front door carrying flowers in a grocery bag, his work clothes still dusty from a construction site, but his face showing the kind of hopeful expression that spoke of someone ready to apologize and make things right. At 30, he was built like the construction supervisor he was with. Broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of honest work, but his blue eyes held a gentleness that made it clear why the children had grown so attached to him. "Sarah, I brought dinner and wanted to talk about," he began, then stopped mid-sentence as he took in the scene before him. Emma was crying real tears now. Tyler was clinging to her arm. Grace was reaching toward me from her high chair, and Sarah and I were staring at each other with the kind of intensity that made it clear something significant was happening. "Marcus," Sarah said quickly, immediately shifting into her prepared script, despite everything that had just been revealed. I'm so glad you're here. Donald was just leaving because apparently he thinks he knows better than I do about raising my own children. It was a masterful attempt at manipulation designed to put Marcus in the position of choosing sides while painting me as the controlling brother who didn't respect Sarah's autonomy. Under normal circumstances, it might have worked perfectly, triggering Marcus's protective instincts and his desire to prove he supported Sarah's independence. But Emma, who had been watching this entire exchange with the kind of awareness that children develop when they live in unpredictable emotional environments, made a decision that changed everything. "No, Mommy," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the adult tension like a sword through silk. "Uncle Donald didn't say anything mean about us. He just asked about the things you taught me to say to make Marcus sad." Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something much more troubling as he processed Emma's words. "What things, Emma?" Before Sarah could intervene, Tyler joined his sister in what amounted to a childhood rebellion against being used as pawns in adult games. "Mommy taught us to cry about missing Uncle Donald so you would feel bad and want to stay here more." The flowers in Marcus's hand fell to the floor as the full implication of what the children were revealing sank in. Sarah. What are they talking about? This was the moment when Sarah could have chosen honesty, accountability, and the possibility of rebuilding trust through genuine communication. Instead, she doubled down on the manipulation strategy that had been her primary relationship tool for months. "Marcus, you have to choose," she said, her voice carrying the kind of dramatic ultimatum that had probably worked in previous relationships. "Either you trust me to handle my family relationships, or you believe whatever stories Donald is putting in the children's heads." But Marcus wasn't looking at me anymore. His attention was focused entirely on Emma and Tyler, who were now both crying as they realized that their mother was asking him not to believe them. As a man who'd grown up with an alcoholic mother who regularly used emotional manipulation to avoid accountability, Marcus recognized the pattern with the kind of clarity that comes from hard-earned experience. "Emma," Marcus said gently, kneeling down to her level just as I had done. "Can you tell me exactly what your mom taught you to say to me?" What followed was the most heartbreaking and revealing 10 minutes of my life. Emma, speaking with the kind of detailed honesty that only children possess, described months of coaching sessions where Sarah had taught her to ask specific questions designed to make Marcus feel guilty, jealous, and pressured to commit more deeply to the family. Tyler not wanting to be left out of what he perceived as truth, telling time-added details about how Sarah had shown him which toys to leave out, so it would look like I bought more presents than Marcus did, and how she'd taught him to mention my name in specific context to create maximum emotional impact. Marcus listened to all of this with the expression that progressed from shock to hurt to something that looked like grief. When the children finished their revelations, he stood up slowly and looked at Sarah with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than anger ever could. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I've been planning to propose to you next month." The words hit the room like a bomb going off. Sarah's face went white again, but this time with shock rather than fear of being caught. Even I felt stunned by this revelation as it recontextualized everything that had been happening over the past few months. I've been working overtime for the last 3 months to save money for an engagement ring. Marcus continued, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of pain that made my chest ache in sympathy. "I've been looking at houses big enough for all of us, including a room that Emma and Tyler wouldn't have to share. I've been distant lately because I was trying to keep the surprise, not because I was planning to leave." Sarah's carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and for the first time in our adult lives, I saw my sister completely speechless. All of her manipulation tactics had been designed to secure the very commitment that Marcus had already decided to make, and in the process, she'd nearly destroyed the relationship she was trying to protect. "Marcus," she started, then stopped, apparently realizing that no amount of explanation could undo what had been revealed. Marcus looked at the children, then at me, then back at Sarah. "I need some time to think about this," he said finally. "I'll be staying at Jake's for a while." He walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "Sarah, I love you, and I love these kids. But I can't be in a relationship where love is used as a weapon, and children are taught to manipulate the adults who care about them." After Marcus left, the house fell into the kind of silence that follows emotional explosions. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, finally crying tears that were completely genuine, while Emma and Tyler clung to each other with the kind of confusion that comes from watching their secure world crumble around them. Standing in that living room surrounded by scattered flowers and children who were just beginning to understand that their mother had been using them in ways they couldn't fully comprehend, I realized that the confrontation I'd planned had revealed something far worse than anything I'd imagined. Sarah hadn't just been manipulating me and Marcus, she'd been teaching her children that love was conditional, that relationships required strategic deception, and that their own emotions were tools to be used for adult purposes. The 2 weeks following Marcus's departure felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck, where every car contained a different aspect of our family's dysfunction. Sarah called me 17 times the first day alone, her voice cycling through every emotional register from desperate pleading to angry accusation to broken-hearted sobbing. Each call was a masterclass in manipulation, but now that I understood her tactics, they felt more like pathetic magic tricks, performed by someone who'd forgotten that the audience knew how every illusion worked. "Donald, you destroyed my life," she sobbed during a Tuesday afternoon call that interrupted my meeting with a client who was paying me to design their company's new logo. "Marcus was the best thing that ever happened to me and the kids, and now he won't even return my calls because you poisoned him against me." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to make me question my own motives. Had I exposed Sarah's manipulation because I genuinely wanted to help everyone involved, or because I was angry about being used and wanted revenge? The line between justice and retaliation felt thinner than paper, when measured against the sound of Grace crying for Marcus in the background of every phone call. Marcus had indeed moved back to his friend Jake Morrison's apartment above the downtown hardware store, and according to Tom, he wasn't handling the situation any better than Sarah was. Jake described him as devastated, rather than angry, spending his evenings staring at engagement ring websites and wondering if there had been any genuine moments in his relationship with Sarah, or if everything had been calculated performance art. The children were caught in the middle of this adult emotional hurricane, and their behavior began reflecting the chaos in ways that broke my heart on a daily basis. Emma started having nightmares about adults lying to each other, waking up screaming that she couldn't tell which grown-ups were telling the truth. Tyler began wetting the bed again for the first time in 2 years, and Grace developed separation anxiety so severe that she would panic whenever Sarah left her sight for more than a few minutes. Mrs. Catherine Patterson, the children's school counselor, called me on a Friday afternoon with the kind of professional concern that made my stomach drop to my shoes. As the emergency contact listed on all 3 children's school records, I was apparently the person she turned to when Emma's teacher reported that the 8-year-old had been caught teaching other children how to make grown-ups feel sorry for you so they'll do what you want. "Mr. Donald, I'm worried about the level of emotional instability these children are experiencing," Mrs. Patterson said in her calm, measured voice that somehow made everything sound more serious. "Emma seems to understand adult relationship dynamics in ways that are inappropriate for her age. Tyler is showing regression behaviors that suggest significant stress, and according to the daycare, Grace has been inconsolable during drop-offs." The conversation forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding since the night of the big revelation. While I'd been focused on exposing Sarah's manipulation and protecting my own emotional well-being, I hadn't fully considered how devastating this upheaval would be for 3 children who were innocent victims of their mother's psychological games. "What do you recommend?" I asked already, knowing that the answer would require more commitment and responsibility than I'd ever taken on before. "These children need stability and honest communication from the adults in their lives," Mrs. Patterson replied. "If the family situation continues to deteriorate, I may need to contact social services to ensure their welfare is being protected." That threat hung over everything like a sword suspended by the thinnest possible thread. Social services involvement would mean investigations, caseworkers, potential foster care placement, and the complete destruction of what remained of our family unit. The children would pay the ultimate price for Sarah's manipulation and my decision to expose it. Desperate to understand my own role in this disaster, I started seeing Dr. Amanda Foster, a family therapist who specialized in codependent relationships and trauma recovery. Dr. Foster operated out of a converted Victorian house downtown, and her office felt like a comfortable living room where people could safely examine the most painful aspects of their lives. During our third session, Dr. Foster helped me understand something that recontextualized my entire relationship with Sarah and my response to our parents' death. Donald, it sounds like you took over the role of emotional caretaker for your sister after your parents died, but you never processed your own grief because you were so focused on managing hers. The observation hit me like cold water on a sleeping face. For 3 years, I'd been operating under the assumption that Sarah needed more support than I did because she was younger and had children to care for. In reality, I'd been using my role as the helpful big brother to avoid dealing with my own feelings of loss, abandonment, and fear about building intimate relationships outside my family system. Your sister learned that she could manage her anxiety about relationships by creating crises that guaranteed your attention and support, Dr. Foster continued. But you learned that you could manage your anxiety about commitment and loss by always having a family emergency that took priority over your own emotional needs. That revelation forced me to examine my relationship with Rachel, my ex-girlfriend, who'd ended things 6 months earlier. Because in her words, you're more married to your sister's problems than you are committed to building something real with me. At the time, I'd dismissed her concerns as selfish, but now I could see that she'd been trying to compete with a dysfunction that I was actively choosing to maintain. It was during this period of uncomfortable self-examination that I discovered the financial component of Sarah's manipulation, and it was so shocking that it temporarily overshadowed every other betrayal I'd uncovered. While helping Sarah organize paperwork for a legal consultation about custody arrangements, I found bank statements that revealed systematic withdrawals from the children's college funds that our parents had established before their death. The trust fund, which had started at nearly $75,000, now contained less than $30,000. The withdrawals corresponded perfectly with Sarah's relationship timeline with Marcus. She'd used the children's inheritance to buy expensive gifts for him to pay for elaborate date nights designed to compete with his ex-girlfriend's memory and to fund what she called relationship maintenance expenses. That included everything from new clothes to professional photography sessions designed to create the perfect social media presence. My hands shook as I reviewed bank statements that showed 18 months of steady withdrawals, each one accompanied by explanations like family emergency expenses and childcare necessities that bore no resemblance to the actual purchases. Sarah had stolen from her own children's future to fund her relationship manipulation strategies, and as the co-trustee of their accounts, I was legally responsible for allowing it to happen. The legal consultation with family attorney George Reynolds painted an even darker picture of our situation. Mr. Reynolds, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd handled estate planning for our parents, explained that the financial theft created potential criminal liability for Sarah and ethical violations for me as the co-trustee who'd failed to monitor the account activity properly. Donald, you have 2 choices, he said, reviewing the financial documents with the kind of careful attention that comes from decades of handling family legal crises. You can report the theft and protect yourself legally, which would likely result in criminal charges against your sister. Or you can work with her to restore the funds and implement oversight that prevents future abuse. Either path would require confronting Sarah about her financial crimes against her own children, and both carried the risk of triggering social services involvement if the children's welfare appeared to be compromised by their mother's behavior. I was trapped between protecting the children's future and protecting their present family stability. Meanwhile, Marcus was conducting his own investigation into the relationship he'd thought was leading toward marriage. According to Jake, he'd been going through text messages, social media posts, and shared memories trying to identify which moments had been genuine and which had been strategic performances designed to manipulate his emotions. The most devastating discovery came when Marcus found Sarah's Pinterest board titled Perfect Family Photos, that contained hundreds of images of families in poses that exactly matched photos Sarah had insisted they take together. Every seemingly spontaneous moment of their relationship had been copied from someone else's social media presence, suggesting that even their most intimate memories had been manufactured according to someone else's template of what romance should look like. Jake arranged a meeting between Marcus and me at Murphy's Diner, a local restaurant where the background noise of clinking dishes and quiet conversation would provide cover for a discussion that neither of us really wanted to have. Marcus looked like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks, his blue eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion that comes from questioning everything you thought you knew about someone you loved. Donald, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, Marcus said after we'd ordered coffee and pie that neither of us would actually eat. Looking back at the past 6 months, were there any genuine moments between Sarah and me, or was everything part of this manipulation strategy? The question hung between us like a challenge that neither friendship nor honesty could easily answer. How do you tell someone that their love story was actually a carefully scripted psychological experiment? How do you separate genuine emotion from strategic performance, when the person doing the performing might not even know the difference themselves? Marcus, I think Sarah's feelings for you were real, I said, finally choosing my words carefully. But I also think she's been playing emotional games for so long that she might not know how to have an honest relationship anymore. His laugh was bitter and tired. You know what the crazy thing is, I still love her. Even knowing all this, even understanding that she used her kids as weapons against my emotions, I still want to find a way to make this work. How messed up does that make me? Before I could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus glanced at it, then showed me the screen where Sarah had sent a photo of Grace holding a drawing that said, "I miss Marcus," in crayon letters that were obviously written by an adult hand. She's still doing it, Marcus said, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and despair. Even after everything that's been exposed, she's still trying to manipulate me through the kids. Sitting in that diner watching a good man struggle with the cognitive dissonance of loving someone who'd systematically deceived him, I realized that Sarah's manipulation had created casualties far beyond what any of us had initially understood. The children were learning that love required strategic deception. Marcus was learning to distrust his own emotions, and I was learning that sometimes protecting the people you love requires becoming temporarily willing to be seen as the villain in their story. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Emma called me from the school nurse's office, her 8-year-old voice shaking with a terror that no child should ever have to experience. "Uncle Donald, Ami won't wake up and Grace is crying, and Tyler doesn't know what to do, and the grown-ups need to fix everything right now." I broke every traffic law in the state getting to Sarah's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white while my mind raced through every terrible possibility. When I burst through the front door using my emergency key, I found Sarah passed out on the living room couch, surrounded by empty wine bottles and prescription medication containers, while Grace screamed in her crib upstairs, and Tyler sat on the kitchen floor eating cereal directly from the box because he couldn't reach the bowls in the cabinet. The paramedics confirmed that Sarah had taken a dangerous combination of anxiety medication and alcohol, not enough to be life-threatening, but enough to render her completely unconscious, while 3 children under the age of 9 fended for themselves for nearly 6 hours. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Emma grabbed my hand with the kind of desperate strength that comes from watching your entire world collapse. "Is Mommy going to die like Grandma and Grandpa?" She asked, her brown eyes wide with the kind of terror that would probably haunt her dreams for years to come. Standing in that hospital waiting room with 3 traumatized children clinging to me like life preservers, I made a decision that would have been impossible just a month earlier. I was done enabling Sarah's destructive behavior, done prioritizing her emotional needs over the children's safety, and done allowing my fear of family conflict to perpetuate a system that was damaging everyone involved. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with every adult who had a stake in these children's well-being. Dr. Foster agreed to mediate the discussion at her office, while Mr. Reynolds would be present to explain the legal implications of whatever decisions we made. Mrs. Patterson would attend to advocate for the children's educational and emotional needs. And surprisingly, Marcus agreed to participate because his feelings for the kids transcended his relationship problems with Sarah. I also reached out to Tom and his wife Linda, who'd been quietly observing our family drama with the kind of concerned helpfulness that true friends provide during crisis situations. Tom had grown up with Sarah and me, and Linda was a pediatric nurse who understood child development in ways that could help us create a healthier environment for Emma, Tyler, and Grace. Even Janet agreed to attend, apparently feeling guilty about her role in developing and encouraging Sarah's manipulation strategies. According to Tom, she'd been having nightmares about teaching other women tactics that could potentially harm children, and she wanted to help repair whatever damage her advice had caused. The most difficult person to convince was Sarah herself, who was released from the hospital with a psychiatric evaluation that recommended immediate counseling and a support system that prioritized her children's well-being over her relationship anxieties. When I explained that we were holding a family meeting to establish new boundaries and support systems, her first response was to accuse me of trying to steal her children. "Donald, you can't just take over my life because I had one bad night," she said, her voice carrying the defensive anger of someone who knew she'd crossed a line but wasn't ready to admit the full extent of her mistakes. "I'm their mother, and I make the decisions about what's best for them. Sarah, you passed out drunk while your children were home alone for 6 hours," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite the fury that was building in my chest. "Emma had to call me from school because she was afraid you were dead. This isn't about one bad night. This is about a pattern of behavior that's putting kids at risk." The family meeting itself felt like a combination between an intervention, a legal proceeding, and a therapy session. We gathered in Dr. Foster's office on a Saturday morning when the building was otherwise empty, creating a space where everyone could speak honestly without worrying about being overheard. Sarah arrived 20 minutes late, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather and carrying herself with the kind of brittle defensiveness that suggested she was prepared for battle rather than dialogue. She'd dressed carefully in a conservative blouse and slacks that were designed to make her look like a responsible parent, but the effect was undermined by her obvious hangover and the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't completely conceal. "I want everyone to know that I love my children more than anything in the world." Sarah began before anyone else could speak her voice, carrying the rehearsed quality of someone who'd been practicing her defense. "I made some mistakes with my relationship strategy, but that doesn't make me a bad mother." Dr. Foster allowed her to finish, then gently redirected the conversation toward the purpose of our gathering. "Sarah, everyone here loves you and wants to help create a stable environment for your children. This isn't about determining whether you're a good or bad mother. This is about establishing support systems that prioritize the children's well-being." What followed was the most emotionally exhausting 3 hours of my life. Mrs. Patterson presented documentation of the children's behavioral changes at school, including Emma's regression in academic performance and Tyler's increased aggression with other children. Tom and Linda shared their observations of the family dynamics during social gatherings, noting the children's anxiety levels and their confusion about adult relationship dynamics. Janet made a tearful confession about the manipulation tactics she'd helped develop, admitting that she'd been projecting her own bitter divorce experiences onto Sarah's relationship and encouraging strategies that she now realized were harmful to everyone involved. Her ex-husband had used similar manipulation tactics during their marriage, and she'd unconsciously been teaching Sarah to perpetuate the same destructive patterns. Mr. Reynolds explained the legal situation regarding the college fund theft, making it clear that restoration of the funds was non-negotiable, and that future oversight would be required to protect the children's inheritance. He also outlined the potential consequences if social services became involved, including the possibility of temporary custody arrangements that could remove the children from Sarah's care entirely. Marcus spoke last, his voice carrying the kind of careful control that comes from someone who spent weeks processing complex emotions. "Sarah, I want you to know that I still love you, and I still want to be part of these kids' lives. But I can't be in a relationship where love is used as a weapon and children are taught that manipulation is how you get your needs met. Then came the moment that changed everything. Dr. Foster asked Emma, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner coloring, if there was anything she wanted to tell the grown-ups about how all of this had affected her. Emma looked up from her coloring book with the kind of serious expression that only children can manage when they're about to say something that adults desperately need to hear. I just want everyone to stop lying and stop being mad at each other. I don't want to practice crying anymore, and I don't want Tyler to be scared that Mommy won't wake up. The room fell completely silent as the weight of an 8-year-old's wisdom settled over all of us. In one sentence, Emma had stripped away every adult justification, every complex emotional dynamic, every legal consideration, and reduced our situation to its essential truth. The children needed the grown-ups in their lives to stop playing games and start prioritizing honesty, safety, and love over manipulation, fear, and control. Looking around that room at the faces of people who all genuinely cared about these children, I realized that we had the foundation for something much better than what we'd been providing. We had love resources, professional guidance, and most importantly, a shared commitment to putting the children's needs first. The plan we developed over the following 2 hours was comprehensive and non-negotiable. Sarah would attend individual therapy twice a week and family therapy with the children once a week. She would complete a parenting program focused on healthy communication and emotional regulation. She would participate in a financial recovery plan to restore the college funds and submit to oversight that prevented future theft. I would continue providing support, but within clearly defined boundaries that didn't enable manipulation or crisis creation. Marcus would maintain his relationship with the children, regardless of his romantic relationship with Sarah, providing them with a stable male figure whose presence wasn't contingent on adult drama. Most importantly, we established a support network that didn't rely solely on family members, but included professional resources, community connections, and backup systems that could provide help during genuine emergencies without requiring manipulation or crisis creation. As we left Dr. Foster's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Instead of the exhausted dread that usually followed family meetings, I felt hope that we might actually be able to create something healthier for everyone involved, especially the 3 children who deserved so much better than what they'd been given. 3 weeks into our new family arrangement, disaster struck in a way that tested every boundary we'd established and forced everyone to discover what genuine crisis management looked like when manipulation wasn't an option. Sarah had been attending her therapy sessions religiously and seemed to be making progress in understanding how her anxiety about abandonment had driven her to create the very relationship problems she'd been trying to avoid. The children were showing signs of improvement as well. Emma had stopped having nightmares and was beginning to participate in school activities again. Tyler's bedwetting had decreased significantly, and Grace was sleeping through the night for the first time in months. Even Marcus had started visiting regularly, building relationships with the kids that weren't dependent on their mother's romantic manipulation strategies. Then, on a Thursday afternoon that started like any other, Emma collapsed during her school's Halloween parade, suffering what the emergency room doctors would later diagnose as a severe allergic reaction to something she'd eaten during the class party. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, she was struggling to breathe and covered in hives that made her look like she'd been attacked by angry bees. I received the call from Mrs. Patterson while I was in the middle of designing a logo for a new restaurant, and the terror in her voice made my blood run cold. "Donald, Emma's been rushed to Children's Hospital. Sarah's on her way, but we thought you should know immediately." The drive to the hospital felt like traveling through a nightmare, where time moved both too slowly and too quickly. Every red light seemed to last forever, while my mind raced through every terrible possibility. But the miles disappeared under my tires, as if the road itself was pulling me toward whatever crisis awaited at the other end. I arrived to find Sarah in the pediatric emergency room waiting area, pacing back and forth like a caged animal while tears streamed down her face. For the first time in months, her distress was completely genuine, without any calculation or performance. This was raw maternal terror, the kind that strips away every defense mechanism and reveals the primal love that exists beneath all the complicated adult dysfunction. "They won't let me see her," Sarah sobbed, grabbing my arm the moment I walked through the automatic doors. "They said she's stable, but they're still running tests and I can't see her, and I don't know what happened, and what if I lose her like we lost Mom and Dad, and what if this is my fault somehow?" The rapid-fire stream of anxiety was so different from Sarah's usual calculated emotional manipulation that it took me a moment to recognize it as genuine panic rather than strategic performance. This was my sister. As I remembered her from childhood before our parents' death had taught her to view relationships as battlefields, requiring constant strategic maneuvering. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric emergency medicine physician treating Emma, explained that our niece had suffered anaphylactic shock from a severe peanut allergy that none of us had known existed. The school's Halloween party had featured homemade treats from various parents, and Emma had eaten a chocolate chip cookie that contained peanut flour as an ingredient. "She's going to be fine," Dr. Walsh assured us, her calm professional demeanor providing an anchor of stability in the emotional storm we were both experiencing. "We've treated the reaction successfully, but she'll need to stay overnight for observation, and you'll need to work with an allergist to prevent future incidents." The relief that flooded through me was so powerful it nearly knocked me off my feet, but it was immediately followed by the practical realization that this was exactly the kind of genuine emergency that our family had struggled to handle appropriately in the past. Sarah's instinct would normally be to create crisis and drama around the situation, using Emma's hospitalization as ammunition for whatever adult conflict she was currently managing. Instead, something remarkable happened. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and shifted into what could only be described as functional parent mode. "What do we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? What kind of testing does she need? How do we notify the school? Should Tyler and Grace be tested for allergies too?" The transformation was subtle but significant. Instead of asking how this crisis could be used to manage her relationship anxieties, Sarah was focusing entirely on Emma's medical needs and long-term safety. It was the first time I'd seen her prioritize practical problem-solving over emotional manipulation since our parents had died. Marcus arrived at the hospital still wearing his work clothes, having left a construction site the moment he received Sarah's call. His presence created a moment of tension as everyone tried to navigate the new boundaries we'd established. But the children's medical emergency provided clarity about what really mattered. "How is she?" he asked, addressing the question to both Sarah and me without the awkwardness that had characterized most of our recent interactions. "She's stable, but we're still learning about managing a severe peanut allergy," I replied, then watched as Marcus immediately shifted into protective mode, asking practical questions about emergency medication, school notification procedures, and prevention strategies. Over the next 24 hours, as we rotated shifts staying with Emma while she recovered, our entire family dynamic began to shift in ways that none of Dr. Foster's therapy sessions had been able to achieve. Faced with a genuine crisis that required cooperation rather than competition, we discovered that we could actually function as a supportive team when manipulation wasn't part of the equation. Tom and Linda arrived with Tyler and Grace, who'd been at their house for a playdate when the emergency call came. Instead of using the children's concern as an opportunity to create drama, Sarah focused on reassuring them that their sister was going to be okay and explaining the allergy situation in age-appropriate terms that didn't increase their anxiety. "Emma has to be extra careful about certain foods now," Sarah explained to Tyler, who was clutching his stuffed elephant and trying not to cry. "But she's going to be fine, and we're all going to learn how to keep her safe." The absence of manipulation in Sarah's communication was so noticeable that it actually felt strange at first. I'd become so accustomed to parsing her words for hidden meanings and strategic implications that hearing her speak directly and honestly about a difficult situation felt almost foreign. Emma herself handled the situation with the kind of resilience that children often display in the face of genuine adversity. When she woke up in the hospital bed surrounded by balloons and stuffed animals from what felt like half the town, her first concern was whether she'd missed the school Halloween parade entirely. "Uncle Donald, did I mess up Halloween for everyone?" She asked, her voice still hoarse from the breathing difficulties she'd experienced during the allergic reaction. "Emma, you didn't mess up anything," I assured her, sitting on the edge of her hospital bed and marveling at how much older she looked after just one day of medical crisis. "Everyone just wants you to be healthy and safe." What happened next was perhaps the most significant moment in our family's healing process. Marcus, who'd been standing quietly near the window, approached Emma's bed and asked if he could talk to her about something important. "Emma, I want you to know that I love you and Tyler and Grace very much, and that's not going to change no matter what happens between your mom and me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of gentle honesty that children instinctively recognize and trust. "But I also want you to know that you never have to worry about making grown-ups happy or fixing grown-up problems. That's not your job." Emma looked at him with the kind of serious attention that indicated she understood exactly what he was saying. "Marcus, are you going to marry Mommy?" The question hung in the air like a test that could determine the direction of everyone's future. Sarah tensed visibly, clearly fighting the urge to intervene or influence Emma's conversation with Marcus, but she managed to remain silent and allow them to have an honest exchange. "Emma, I don't know yet," Marcus replied, choosing truth over false reassurance. "Your mom and I have some grown-up things to work through first, but I promise you that whether we get married or not, I'll always be someone you can count on." It was the kind of honest, age-appropriate communication that had been missing from our family dynamics for years. Instead of using the children as emotional leverage or asking them to manage adult anxieties, Marcus was providing them with the security of knowing that their relationships with him weren't contingent on romantic outcomes between the grown-ups. Dr. Foster, who visited Emma in the hospital as part of our ongoing family therapy, observed something significant about how we'd handled this genuine crisis compared to the manufactured emergencies that had previously dominated our family interactions. "This experience has shown everyone what healthy crisis management looks like," she explained to Sarah and me during a brief consultation in the hospital hallway. "Instead of using Emma's emergency to create drama or manipulate relationships, you focused entirely on her medical needs and emotional well-being. That's a huge step forward." The real transformation became evident over the following weeks as Emma recovered and our family settled into a new normal that was built around honest communication rather than strategic manipulation. Sarah continued attending therapy and began recognizing her own emotional patterns in ways that allowed her to make different choices when anxiety threatened to trigger old behaviors. The children's improvement was dramatic and sustained. Emma returned to school with a comprehensive allergy management plan and a confidence that came from knowing the adults in her life could handle genuine emergencies without creating additional drama. Tyler stopped wetting the bed entirely and began participating in activities that he'd previously avoided, due to anxiety about unpredictable adult behavior. Grace, though too young to understand the specific changes, responded to the increased emotional stability by becoming more adventurous and social, engaging with other children and adults in ways that suggested she felt secure in her family environment for the first time in her young life. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah began developing genuine friendships with other parents at the children's school, relationships that weren't built around shared manipulation strategies or crisis management, but around common interests and mutual support that didn't require emotional warfare to maintain. 6 months after Emma's allergic reaction forced our family to confront the difference between genuine crisis and manufactured drama, I stood in the same community center where our parents had volunteered for years, watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine during the darkest days of Sarah's manipulation campaign. Emma was reading a story to Grace while Tyler built an elaborate castle with blocks that Marcus had brought him, and the sound of Sarah's genuine laughter filled the space where we'd gathered for the children's spring school program. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't been easy. Sarah's journey through therapy had required her to confront painful truths about how our parents' sudden death had triggered abandonment fears that drove her to create the very relationship instability she was trying to avoid. Understanding the psychology behind her manipulation didn't excuse the damage it had caused, but it provided a foundation for building healthier patterns moving forward. The financial restoration had taken months of careful budgeting and legal oversight, but Sarah had successfully repaid the money she'd stolen from the children's college funds through a combination of a second job selling jewelry she'd bought during her relationship with Marcus and contributing every tax refund and bonus payment until the accounts were fully restored. More importantly, she'd agreed to ongoing financial oversight that prevented future misuse of the children's inheritance. Dr. Foster had worked with our entire family to establish communication patterns that prioritized honesty over strategy, and the results were visible in every interaction. When Tyler had broken his arm falling from a tree in their backyard 2 months earlier, Sarah's response had been immediate, practical concern, rather than an opportunity to create relationship drama. She'd called me for emotional support, rather than crisis management, and the difference had been remarkable for everyone involved. Marcus had indeed proposed to Sarah, but only after months of couples counseling and demonstrated changes in how she handled conflict and anxiety. The proposal itself had taken place during a family barbecue where everyone was present, symbolizing how their relationship had evolved from secretive manipulation to transparent commitment that included the entire extended family support network. "Donald, I need to ask you something before we make this official," Marcus had said, approaching me during the barbecue while Sarah played with the children on the swing set Tom had built in their backyard. "I want your blessing, not just for marrying Sarah, but for becoming a stepfather to Emma, Tyler, and Grace." The request demonstrated how much our family dynamics had changed. Instead of viewing me as competition for Sarah's attention or as an obstacle to their independence, Marcus had come to understand that my relationship with the children was an asset to their family rather than a threat to his role as their potential stepfather. "Marcus, you've proven yourself to these kids in ways that matter," I'd replied, watching Tyler run toward us with a drawing he'd made of our entire extended family, including Tom and Linda, and even Dr. Foster. "You've shown them that adult love doesn't have to come with manipulation or conditions." The wedding itself, planned for the following spring, would be a small celebration focused on family unity rather than social media performance or relationship validation. Emma was thrilled to be the flower girl. Tyler had been practicing his ring-bearer responsibilities with the seriousness of a military operation, and Grace would be carried down the aisle by Linda, symbolizing how our support network had expanded to include friends who'd become family. My own life had undergone equally significant changes during this period of family healing. Working with Dr. Foster had helped me recognize how I'd been using my role as the family rescuer to avoid dealing with my own grief and fear of intimate commitment. The pattern had kept me trapped in a cycle where I prioritized family crisis management over building my own romantic relationships. Rachel had agreed to try dating again, but only after I demonstrated sustained changes in how I handled family boundaries and personal priorities. Our relationship was developing slowly and carefully, built on honest communication about our individual growth and shared commitment to creating something healthy rather than simply repeating familiar dysfunctional patterns. "I can see the difference in how you handle your family relationships now," Rachel had told me during a dinner date that wasn't interrupted by emergency calls from Sarah. "You're still supportive and caring, but you're not trying to fix everyone's problems for them anymore." The professional success that had followed my personal growth felt like a bonus rather than the main event. With more emotional energy available for creative work, my graphic design business had expanded to include 3 regular corporate clients and a waiting list of small businesses seeking logo and website design services. The financial stability allowed me to contribute to family activities from a position of strength rather than codependent obligation. The most significant change, however, was visible in the children themselves. Emma had joined the school drama club where she channeled her emotional intelligence and performance abilities into creative expression rather than adult manipulation. Her teacher reported that she'd become a leader among her peers, helping other children navigate playground conflicts with wisdom that seemed far beyond her 9 years. Tyler had discovered a love of soccer that consumed most of his free time and provided him with friendships based on shared interests rather than family drama. His coach noted that he was one of the most supportive teammates on the team, always encouraging other players and celebrating their successes rather than competing for adult attention. Grace, now nearly 3 years old, was thriving in preschool and demonstrating the kind of secure attachment that child development experts associate with stable, loving family environments. Her teachers described her as confident, curious, and socially engaged, showing none of the anxiety or regression behaviors that had characterized her earlier development. The ripple effects of our family's transformation had extended beyond our immediate circle. Janet had ended her relationship with the single mother's manipulation support group and instead started attending a healthy relationships workshop at their church. Several of the other women who'd been learning manipulation tactics from Sarah had also sought counseling when they realized how their strategies were affecting their children. Tom and Linda had become unofficial family coordinators, hosting regular barbecues and holiday celebrations that brought everyone together without drama or hidden agendas. Their own children had benefited from the expanded social network, and Linda often commented on how much she enjoyed family gatherings that didn't require emotional crisis management. Even Mrs. Patterson at the children's school had noted the family's transformation, using our situation as an anonymous case study in her continuing education courses about how professional intervention and community support could help families overcome destructive patterns and build healthier dynamics. Standing in that community center 6 months later, watching Emma help Grace navigate the slide, while Tyler explained the finer points of block architecture to anyone who would listen, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful journey that had brought us to this place of genuine healing and hope. The hardest lesson I'd learned was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their self-destruction, even when they beg you to enable them. Sarah's manipulation had been driven by legitimate fears about abandonment and loss, but enabling those fears had only made them stronger and more destructive. By setting boundaries and insisting on honesty, I'd forced our entire family to confront the difference between love and codependence, between support and enablement, between helping someone and doing for them what they needed to learn to do for themselves. The process had been painful for everyone involved, but the results spoke for themselves in the laughter of children who no longer carried the weight of adult emotional manipulation. Sarah's greatest gift to her children hadn't been the endless babysitting requests or the dramatic relationship strategies she'd thought would secure their future. It had been her willingness to face her own psychological patterns and make the difficult changes necessary to become the mother they deserved, someone who could provide love without conditions and support without manipulation. Marcus's commitment to the family had deepened rather than weakened when it was no longer contingent on jealousy and strategic emotional warfare. His relationship with the children was built on genuine affection and consistent presence, rather than competition with their uncle or their mother's anxiety about abandonment. As for me, I discovered that the greatest gift I could give my family wasn't endless availability for crisis management, but the courage to insist on healthy relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine care for everyone's well-being, rather than temporary emotional relief through manipulation and drama. The community center where we'd gathered was the same place our parents had volunteered every Saturday for years, teaching literacy classes to adults who were working to improve their lives despite difficult circumstances. Standing there surrounded by the sound of children playing and adults laughing together, I could almost feel their presence approving of how we'd finally learned to honor their memory through healing rather than dysfunction. As the evening wound down and we began collecting scattered toys and folding chairs, Rachel helped me carry supplies to my car, while Emma and Tyler raced ahead to claim the front seats they were still too young to occupy during actual driving. "You know what I love most about your family now," Rachel said, watching Sarah and Marcus work together to buckle Grace into her car seat, while Emma and Tyler argued good-naturedly about who would get to sit by the window during the drive home. "What's that?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on the transformation we'd all witnessed and participated in over the past months. "They actually like each other now," she said simply. "Before, it always felt like everyone was performing their roles rather than enjoying each other's company. Now, it feels like a real family." Her observation captured something essential about what we'd accomplished. We'd moved from a family system based on crisis management and emotional manipulation to one built on genuine affection and mutual support. The children were free to be children rather than emotional support systems for anxious adults, and the adults were free to build relationships based on honest communication rather than strategic warfare. Driving home through the quiet streets of our small town, I reflected on how different this evening felt compared to the midnight emergency calls that had once defined my relationship with Sarah and her children. There had been no manufactured crises, no hidden agendas, no manipulation masquerading as family loyalty. Just people who cared about each other spending time together and enjoying the simple pleasure of being part of something larger than their individual fears and insecurities. The most profound realization was that love hadn't diminished when we'd removed manipulation from our family equation. It had actually grown stronger and more sustainable. Without the constant drama and crisis management, we'd been able to discover what genuine care and support looked like when it wasn't contaminated by hidden motives and strategic emotional warfare. Sarah had learned that she didn't need to create emergencies to secure love and attention. Marcus had learned that commitment didn't require jealousy and competition to be meaningful. The children had learned that their worth wasn't dependent on managing adult emotions or performing their way into family acceptance. And I had learned that the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the courage to help them grow into their best selves, even when that process requires temporary discomfort, and the willingness to be seen as the villain in their story until they develop the strength to become the hero of their own life. As I pulled into my driveway and prepared to end this chapter of our family story, I felt grateful not just for where we'd arrived, but for the difficult journey that had brought us here. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction and instead insist on the kind of honesty that makes genuine healing possible. Have you ever found yourself caught between helping someone you love and enabling their destructive behavior? How do you balance family loyalty with the need to set healthy boundaries? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life family stories, and share it with anyone who might be struggling with similar relationship challenges. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most beautiful transformations.